It was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and Harry, who was up late watching a movie on TV, heard a knock at his front door. As he got up and reached the door, he flipped the switch to turn on the porch light, but he heard the bulb blow as soon as it came on. Frustrated, but not at all concerned, he opened the front door to see who was outside, but left the screen door in place. As the door opened, he also noticed the street lights up and down his street were all out at the same time, which he thought was rather odd. As his eyes adjusted to what little light there was, he saw two teenage boys about 13 years old standing outside his door. The boy closest to him seemed to be the spokesman for the pair, and the other stood just behind him. Harry looked them both over. They wore khaki cargo pants, white t-shirts and baseball caps, hiding their eyes. "Good day, mate. We were wondering if we could get our little kitten out of your backyard," the older boy asked. Harry was immediately taken back. No one in his part of Australia actually used "good day, mate" as a greeting. Not to mention, the kid's accent was off. But that wasn't all that concerned Harry. When he was that age, wandering through a darkened neighbourhood and knocking on strangers' doors would have been the last thing he would have been doing. And he immediately began to suspect they had an ulterior motive, as an uneasiness began to spread over him. "I'll tell you what, boys. Let me take a look in my backyard, and if it's there, I'll bring the kitten back to you." Harry began to step away from the door when the first boy spoke again. "No, mate. She's afraid of strangers. We have to do it." The other boy chimed in. "We must insist that we get her," he said. For a moment, Harry began to consider letting them in, despite the uneasy feeling he was getting from the pair. But he didn't like their tone, or their explanation for why they needed to be the ones to retrieve the kitten. And he felt their request was more of a command, almost with an ominous tone to it. "How old are you two?" Harry asked. It was almost like something was making him stall for time before he followed his instincts, which told him to close the door. "We're 16, mate," replied the older boy. "Oh, come on, there's no way you two are 16, Harry said. He saw the boys visibly tense up. "Look, mate, we really need to come in and get our kitten." The older boy's voice had taken on a more threatening tone, sounding more hostile and demanding now. "Look, kids, you can forget being rude if you want your kitten back." "Sorry, mate," the spokesman of the two quickly apologized. "Please, we need to get our kitten back." "Please, let us in. We can't come in unless you let us in," said the younger boy. A chill ran up Harry's spine as he grew more and more suspicious. He began to glance over the boys for a concealed weapon of some sort, but it was hard to see, it was so dark out. To his shock, as he looked them over, one of the boys said, "No, we don't have any weapons on us." How did they know what he was thinking? "Does your mother even know you're out this late?" he asked. Not quite sure while he was still engaging with the boys when everything in him had begun to scream danger, and his intuition was telling him to slam the door and get away from them as fast as possible. "Come on, mate, let us in," said the younger of the two. "Our mother will be angry if we don't bring the kitten home," said the elder. Suddenly, a perfect solution seemed to come to Harry. "I'll tell you what, boys. Give me your mum's phone number, and I'll call her tomorrow, and if I find the kitten, I'll bring it over. Just let me grab some paper." He turned slightly from the door to reach a pen and paper nearby, when he noticed, out of the corner of his eye, the older boy stepped right up to the screen door. Harry turned to face him, and this time the boy was close enough for the light from Harry's hallway to reveal the boy's facial features. He had a strange, sadistic grin on his face, and in the place of eyes there was only a soul-chilling darkness. "Get away from my door now," barked Harry. He took a step back, but before he could push the door closed, the older boy leaned forward, almost touching the screen door now, and said, "We're just kids. Let us in to get our kitten." Harry slammed the front door and shouted to it, "I'm calling the cops if you don't get off my porch now." He fumbled for his phone and then looked out the window to see if they were still there, his heart pounding like a jackhammer. The boys were gone. He looked up and down the street, but couldn't see them anywhere. The backyard. He ran through the house in a panic, but when he got to the back door, the backyard was empty. No kitten, no boys. He had no clue how they could have disappeared so quickly. Josh was a 260-pound, 6'7" member of the armed forces. He thought himself fearless and pretty sensible. But when he had 2 experiences with black-eyed kids, he doubted how sensible his mind really was. The first encounter Josh had was when he and his brother Matt were working at a gas station. As they were outside smoking near the pumps late at night, they watched a skinny, frail teenager make his way across the 4-lane highway in front of them. The entire time he crossed the busy road, his head was down, not checking for cars, not bothered by the apparent danger of the situation. As the boy came closer, Josh asked him if he needed some help. His behaviour was anything but normal, and he looked so frail it seemed as though he could collapse at any moment. The boy, still looking down, asked to use the phone. "Sorry," answered his brother Matt, "but the phone's behind the counter and you can't come in and use it. There is a payphone around the corner though." The boy didn't answer, just stood there. An uneasy feeling settled over the 2 brothers, and they simultaneously decided they needed to get back inside the gas station and attend to some business in there pretty quickly. Neither one wanted to admit how unnerved he was by this odd, frail teenager. As they dashed back inside the store, the teenager slowly followed behind them. But he didn't enter. He stood in front of the closed door, slowly raised his head, and watched them. They saw his pale, thin face and hollow, completely black eyes. He stood in front of the door, watching them. He knew it was unlocked. All he had to do was walk in, but it was as though something was preventing him from doing so. Somehow, the brothers seemed to know if he came inside, they would both be in serious danger. Matt grabbed the baseball bat from beneath the counter and approached the door with Josh right behind him. Just as they neared it, the boy turned and walked away. They watched him disappear into the darkness. A strange occurrence for sure, and something that Josh just played off and him and his brother spoke about every now and again, but didn't take too seriously. Just a weirdo, they thought. That was until Josh's second encounter. It was fairly late at night when there was a knock on Josh's door. At first, he just thought it was his neighbour, with whom he shared a bathroom. So he hopped up from the sofa where he'd been watching TV and jerked open the bathroom door, only to find the bathroom empty. He realised the knock was coming from outside, at his front door. As he approached the door, he was trying to figure out who else on the military base would be knocking at this time of night. So he bent over to take a look out the peephole, just as an uneasy feeling started to settle over him. A teenage boy, about 17, was standing in front of his door, his head hanging down. The boy slowly looked up at him until he was staring right into the peephole, and then an evil, predatory grin gradually spread across his pale face. "Please let me in. I need to use the phone." Still staring at the peephole, almost as if he was staring through Josh. Josh noticed the boy looked deathly ill, and he also noticed something really odd about the grin. It was familiar, and looked almost hungry, like an animal. Josh's mind flitted back to the strange encounter him and his brother had had at the gas station. It couldn't be the same kid, could it? "Sorry, kid, I'm about to go to sleep," he lied. "Try the SP building across the way." Then he noticed the boy lower his head just slightly, in a way that Josh recognised as threatening. It's like an alarm went off in his mind, warning him that the boy's intentions were far from innocent, and his power to harm Josh was great. Josh stepped away from the door and heard another knock, harder and more intense this time. He dashed over to his front window, jerking the Venetian blinds up violently, and the boy was standing right in front of the window, as if he knew what Josh was about to do. Though his eyes were still black, Josh felt the kid's eyes glaring at him. For a second he thought there was a look of recognition in his eyes. "Can I come in?" the boy asked again, this time more insistent, almost hostile. He didn't take his eyes off Josh the entire time. In his most menacing voice, Josh shouted, "I'm going to tell you one more time to get away from my door, and I'm calling base security now." As he turned slightly to grab his phone, the boy disappeared. Unnerved, Josh sat back down on the bed. He knew the boy was familiar, but he still couldn't put his finger on if it was the same kid him and his brother had seen the year before. It was almost like it was the same entity, but in a slightly different skin. Needless to say, it was quite a while before he got to sleep that night. It was Halloween, and Sally and her husband had given up on any more trick-or-treaters stopping by, so they turned off the front porch light and let their bulldog Sophie out of her crate and into the living room. Soon, Sally's husband went to bed, leaving Sally and Sophie curled up on the chair watching TV. Suddenly there were 3 knocks at her front door. She was puzzled, not so much by how late the knocks came, but by the fact that someone even knocked at all, because the doorbell lit up and would have been easily visible to anyone standing on the front porch, even with the porch light turned off. An uneasy feeling swept over Sally. She knew that whoever was on the porch had to know she was in. Their front door had a large glass pane in it, and the flickering lights from the TV would have been obvious to anybody standing outside watching. She thought they might even be able to see her, silhouetted. She wondered how long they had been watching when the knocks sounded again. Sally glanced down to her dog, but she was nowhere to be seen. Sally got up to look for her, and eventually found Sophie hunkered down against the back door, whimpering and crying. "Sophie, crate," she ordered the dog. Sophie looked at her as if to say, "Are you crazy? I'm not going back in there." She started to yell up to her husband, but could hear the shower running, and knew that he couldn't hear her. Exasperated with Sophie, and feeling alone, she turned to leave the room. That's when the 3 knocks came again. Hesitantly, Sally walked back into the living room. As she did, a car drove by, and for a split second, its headlights illuminated the front door, revealing the shadow of 2 small children standing on a porch. Relieved, Sally decided they were just a couple of kids trick-or-treating. Nothing to worry about. They'd just gone out too late, that's all. She ignored Sophie's strange behaviour, and attributed the uneasy feeling she felt due to it being Halloween, all the stories about the veil being thin, scary movies on TV. She unlocked the door and pulled it open about 2 feet, wide enough for her to talk to the kids, but not wide enough for a dog to make an escape. She was immediately taken aback. The 2 children, about 11 and 9 years old, were wearing street clothes instead of a costume, and they didn't say trick-or-treat like the kids had all evening long. They were looking down at the ground, silently. Can I help you?" Sally asked. The older girl, still looking down, answered in an oddly mature voice. "Can we come in and use your phone to call our mother?" Immediately, Sally began to wonder why a kid that age, out alone at night, wouldn't have a cell phone. Don't you have a mobile you can use?" she asked. The 2 kids turned their faces to look at each other, as if they were talking to each other, telepathically. They looked back at the ground, and the girl answered, "Our phone ran out of charge. Can we please come in to call our mother? We are all alone, and my brother is scared." Something deep inside Sally, almost primal, told her not to let the kids in. But she realised she had been inching the door open wider and wider without even being conscious of it. The hair on the back of her neck began to stand up, and she tightened her grip on the door. She was torn between a sense of foreboding and a strong motherly instinct. 2 kids alone on the street on Halloween wanting to call their mother seemed harmless. But at the same time she felt very strongly she should not, under any circumstances, let them into her home. "I'll tell you what," she said in a most friendly voice. "Let me have your mother's number and I'll call her for you." The children looked at each other as they had before, and then changed their tactic. "My brother needs to use your bathroom. Can you please come inside?" The girl's voice was slightly more aggressive this time, and she took 2 steps toward the door and looked up, revealing 2 jet black eyes. Sally stepped back, aghast. The little boy began to whimper, and the girl once again spoke up. "Please, ma'am, we are all alone out here, and we are scared." She stepped even closer to the door, so quickly that it alarmed Sally, who leapt back and slammed the door and locked it. After a few seconds passed, she felt a twinge of guilt, so shouted through the door, "Look, I'll call your mum if you give me your number, but I'm not letting you in my house." The pair stood on the porch, just staring at her through the glass pane, as the little boy started to cry. Sally rushed through the house to the kitchen and grabbed the phone. Immediately she called her neighbour across the way to see if they could help. He said he would be right out. But by the time he came outside and Sally went back to the front door, the children were gone. Sophie was later found in the guest bedroom, under the bed, and terrified beyond all reason. She had never seen a dog that scared. Sally said it would take quite a few days until Sophie returned to normal, and she wonders if she ever has since the experience on that Halloween night. Betty was about 10 years old when she encountered what she later believed to be a pair of black-eyed adults, and this occurred in the 1960s, long before the first Black-Eyed Kid story ever reached the public eye, and before any moviegoers had seen black contacts like those seen at the chilling end of the original Stepford Wives. Betty was busy going up and down the neighbourhood trying to sell some Girl Scout cookies, but business wasn't doing well. Though she was young, she was by herself, which wasn't unusual for that era, and she had visited just about every home in her local neighbourhood, but continued to face rejection. Frustrated, she turned the corner onto an unfamiliar street and noticed a car pulling into a driveway. It looked like 3 people were in the car, and she was certain that surely one of them would want some Girl Scout cookies. She hurried across the street as they pulled into their drive and arrived beside their car just as the group was getting out. A woman in her mid-30s got out of the driver's seat, then helped an elderly couple out of the back seats. They were all tall, thin, and seemed quite feeble. Betty decided that of the 3, the elderly couple might be the most likely to have pity on a cute little Girl Scout and maybe purchase some of their cookies. So she hurried up and greeted them happily, but the couple turned around at the same time and looked Betty over. After a second, their wrinkled faces broke into a huge smile and they leaned in closer to Betty. She froze. Their eyes were black, almost cavernous, like the time her older brother had pushed her doll's eyes too far back into his head. They kept leaning closer and closer down towards her face, until she could feel their icy, pungent breath on her cheeks. She was terrified, but she couldn't move. They stared at her with those hollow eyes and started to smile without saying a word. It was as if the darkness in their eye sockets was sucking Betty in and freezing her to the spot. Suddenly, the driver of the car grabbed the couple by the arms and pulled them back away from Betty. She kept repeating, I'm sorry, as she pulled the couple up the driveway towards the house. They followed her, their backs turned to Betty. But as they reached the front door, they turned back at the same time, making eye contact one last time. Betty took off running. She said never in her life would she run as fast as she did that day when she was trying to get home. She dashed into her house and found her mother in the kitchen. Betty didn't say if she ever told her mother what had happened, but she did say it was a long time before she went out to sell cookies again. Gary had heard about black-eyed kids and started researching them online in his spare time. He just didn't believe they were real, thinking the eyes were contacts or some rare medical disease, and the fear that people felt when they encountered them was just the power of suggestion, perhaps some leftover predatory instinct that told them to get away from anybody making too much eye contact with them or acting in a threatening manner. He lived in a large city and figured there had to be a few black-eyed kid experiences around. So to prove his point, he started putting an ad in his local Craigslist, inviting a black-eyed kid to meet him at a certain bench, a short distance from his apartment building. He ran the ad for 6 months, but he didn't have any takers. Instead, he attracted a few weirdos, some pranksters, but didn't see any black-eyed kids. Disappointed, but satisfied that he had at least proven to himself that they weren't real, he stopped posting his ad. One night, he was at home on his computer researching some new topic, when he heard a knock at his door. He glanced at the time and realised how late it was, but no one ever came knocking his apartment door at night. He felt a fear like nothing he had ever felt in his life. Gary claims his blood ran ice cold. He realised what day it was. He had missed his appointment at the park bench for the first time in 6 months, and now they had come to see him at home. He said the fear enveloping him was a primal fear, springing from a deep well within him. It was like he instinctively knew who was at the door, as if generations before him had written that fear into his DNA. He had scoffed at people's fear before, but now it was at his door. It was a different story. He slowly stood up and made his way through his dimly lit apartment. As he unlocked his front door, his heart was pounding and his pulse racing. He opened it just wide enough to see through the bright fluorescent lights in the hallway. He looked straight ahead. There was no one there. He squinted and then looked down. There was a boy, about 9 years old, standing on his welcome mat. And as Gary looked into his face, all his worst fears were confirmed. The boy's eyes were surrounded in darkness. He looked up in the direction of Gary and said, "Can I come in?" Gary knew what the boy was going to ask before he asked it. And to his horror he realised his hand was moving to open the door wider. He clenched his other hand into a fist and held it tightly against his side. He was able to say no, but not without a great deal of effort. The boy replied, "We missed you at the park tonight." He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. Gary took it as a threat. Gary released his fist and closed the door. He gasped for air as he leant back against the door for support, and realised he'd actually been holding his breath the entire time without knowing it. The boy knocked the door again. Gary stepped a few feet back, so shaken and disturbed that it was about an hour before he could move completely away from the door and sit down. During that hour, the boy knocked intermittently, calling Gary, telling him he missed their appointment. Since then, Gary hasn't seen the boy, except for his nightmares. But it stopped him from doing any more research on black-eyed kids, in case just the mere thought of them brought them to his door again. Thanks for listening, and I have a Patreon where you can join our quickly growing paranormal community to get an exclusive bonus episode each month. And please be sure to like and subscribe to be notified when I drop new videos. And I'll see you next time on From Beyond.